Today on the podcast, we're taking a look at canceled movies, whether it's teasing fans throughout a franchise only to have it canceled like The Amazing Spider-Man 3, or directors who have their franchise taken away from them like Del Toro with Hellboy and Pacific Rim. Films get canceled for tons of reasons. Sometimes they even get filmed before they get canceled. We're going to take a look at some of the most popular canceled films, some films we think had the biggest impact because they were canceled, and we'll try and take a guess at what we think would be the most impactful film if it were canceled. Hello and welcome to the ScreenRant podcast. I'm joined here today with my friend Nicholas Kosik again. What's up, buddy?
Hey, great. It's good to see you again, even if it's remotely.
Good to see it. Exactly, right? You know what? We do these remotely, but they think it's crystal clear on their end. Today on the episode, we're going to be looking at movies that were canceled. So lots of movies are greenlit every year that never get made. Whether it's because of creative differences, politics, scheduling, or seemingly random reasons, these films never get to see the light of day. Films get canceled before, during, and even after shooting. Sometimes entire films are set up for an eventual sequel that never gets made. We're going to be taking a butterfly effect style look at these canceled films and see which films would have the biggest impact if they were released. Would we have ever gotten The Dark Knight if Batman and 3 wasn't canceled? Could The Amazing Spider-Man 3 have saved the Sonyverse with Andrew Garfield? We'll also take a look into the strange reasons why films are canceled, whether it's making a film just so you could hold on to the rights of a franchise, or maybe the filmmaker's heart just wasn't in the right place anymore. Finally, we'll take a look at films that may or may not be canceled, but were shelved for one reason or another.
Gorian, I am so excited for this week's episode. This is fascinating stuff.
And the great thing about canceled movies is that there are so many movies that do get canceled or not made. And the word canceled is kind of hard to determine because a lot of the times films will get greenlit and then fall apart. So calling them canceled when people were slowly starting to work on these movies, we'll see exactly what we consider canceled. So just some quick fire examples to start off the episode of movies that you probably heard of at some point or another that just disappeared. We have George Miller's Justice League, Hellboy 3 with Del Toro, Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon, a ton of rumored Alien movies. You have Del Toro's Pacific Rim 2, the Men in Black and 22 Jump Street crossover we never got, Pixar's Newt, and there's even documentaries made about canceled films sometimes, such as Alejandro Jodorowsky's Dune, which is a documentary all about what he wanted to do with the Dune film and how he would have done it differently.
Could be fantastic, no?
Have you heard of any of these movies that were canceled?
Yeah, you know what? I have, actually. And I've always kind of been fascinated by that version of Dune. I haven't seen the documentary yet, but I really want... I know there's just a crazy vision behind that, and I'd love to see it, especially with the new one coming out fairly soon.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because a lot of these films that do get canceled end up having either reboots or someone else remaking the film later on, which again is a bit confusing with the whole canceled thing because, you know, a lot of Alien movies got canceled and then kind of reformatted into what they ended up becoming. Exactly. So we're going to take a look at some of these films where they were remade by either a different director, such as Pacific Rim 2. They just made that without Del Toro. But I consider Pacific Rim 2 a canceled film because it was Del Toro's film that was canceled and then replaced with this not as good sequel.
Exactly. While we're on the topic of Pacific Rim 2, I cannot tell you how much I love the first one. It's got giant robots versus giant aliens. That's all I want in a movie. The second one, though, I went to see it in theaters day one. Man, I was so disappointed. I can't even describe. That was the worst feeling I've ever experienced in my entire life.
And I think that's the thing, too, where when these people don't know that it was Del Toro's Pacific Rim 2 that was canceled, and they see it thinking that, you know, a lot of moviegoers, they don't really know the names of the directors for the most part. They'll just go in and see and think it's the same person making it. We're going to be taking a look at franchises that planned for later sequels that ended up getting canceled for one reason or another. And there are a lot of films that get canceled because of overzealous studio heads. They think they're guaranteed a hit film while they're making it and will often lay groundwork for it in previous films. Basically, ultimately wasting everyone's time that got invested in the franchise. So we're going to take a look at these franchises and see how far along they were before they got canceled and how their reboots did.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. And for the first one, it's going to be all canceled Spider-Man films. This is basically its own category just because of the amount of different people. It's going to blow your mind who was supposed to be making some of these movies back in the day. So, have you seen The Amazing Spider-Man 2?
Unfortunately, I have, yeah.
Yeah, right. We all tried to forget that movie, but
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder.
one of the things that movie was notorious for, and it was kind of insulting in a way, because a lot of the times in this movie they were showing stuff in the background, and that was the stuff you wanted to see. They'd be walking by and you'd see, Doc Ock's arms, and you'd be like, whoa, I want to see more of that stuff. They're kind of toying, they're dangling the keys in front of you, and you keep trying to grab for them. And what ended up happening was that when the second film bombed in the franchise, Mark Webb's films were canceled.
Where we're setting up the Sinister Six.
Yes! And in the first two films, there was just so much stuff that they tried to cram in to try and replicate Marvel's release schedule. Marvel's had way more years than Sony in terms of building this universe, so they really wanted to be able to catch up in terms of a grandiose plot that everyone will be hooked on for, 5 or 6 films.
Right.
And they alluded to stuff in the second film and even had post-credit scenes, and a lot of the stuff just ends up going unanswered. And thanks to the Sony leaks, we actually got to see a glimpse of what they wanted this Spider-Verse franchise to be. So despite it being canceled, we can still take a little look and see what this would have looked like.
Ooh, let's take a look into the crystal ball, Gorian.
I just gotta say, the first one, we've all heard of it, right? Did you hear about the Aunt May movie?
There was an Aunt May movie?
They were planning on making an Aunt May movie, and I'm 80% sure that it's about her being a secret spy in her younger days, kind of like an Agent Carter kind of thing. And it just, again, it's reading these emails. So here's what they were planning for these movies.
Oh boy.
They were gonna have Gwen Stacy coming back as Spider-Woman / Spider-Gwen.
Okay.
Mary Jane would have been in the third film.
Okay.
There'd be a Sinister Six movie. There'd be a Spider-Man 2099 movie. There would be a mid-sequel between the first and second movie with Kraven the Hunter.
Interesting.
A mid-sequel.
Interesting.
They really thought that they were, gonna... Could you imagine? So again, could you imagine if Amazing Spider-Man 3 came out and actually surpassed everyone's expectations? It was actually good.
Yeah. I would have been shocked, actually, but we all know how badly Sony wants to have a Spider-Verse. I mean, we know that by, their animated one that just came out, Into the Spider-Verse. Don't get me wrong, it was great, but they have been trying for years to catch up to Marvel, and I can't tell you how excited I was to hear when Marvel actually got the rights, the cinematic rights to Spider-Man back, because I was like, thank God, they're finally going to do something right.
There was a period of time a couple months ago where we didn't know what was going to happen to Spider-Man. He didn't know if he was going to his mom's house for the weekend or his dad's house for the weekend. He was kind of stuck in this limbo. It's almost comforting now, because we're about to find out how many times Spider-Man fans have had it ripped out of their hands. And just real quick, do you think that if the Spider-Man 3 film was good, what do you think would have happened with Spider-Man in the Marvel franchise? Would they have just excluded him entirely? Do you think they would have tried to combine the universes?
I am an expert at predicting things. At least I consider myself that anyway. But I'm telling you right now, man, if Spider-Man 3 happened and it was good, the Marvel Sony Spider-Man crossover would not have happened.
Man, it's weird to think that, how different would have Endgame been if they didn't have Spider-Man? I mean, you can kind of imagine them just not including a character because they already not include so many, but seeing how well they did it, I really wouldn't want to see, maybe they would have had Spider-Boy, some sort of
Spider-Boy.
Ambiguous legal. Yeah, they would have Spider-Pig.
Does whatever a Spider-Pig does.
Oh my God.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So let's go way back then. Do you know the film company Canon Films?
Canon Films. I don't. What have they done?
So you definitely, their logos they're well known for making these 80s, I'd call them B movies. They were a lot of times sequels and kind of cornier flicks like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Superman 4, and if you've ever seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, you would know exactly what Canon Films all about. It's kind of schlock, but it is the funnest schlock ever.
Good night.
Good night.
They got the license for Spider-Man for $255,000 in 1985.
That's a steal.
And they talked... Yeah, it's a cheap price to pay, seeing how much he costs nowadays.
Yeah.
And they talked to Tobe Hooper about making the film. And Tobe Hooper's known for making horror movies. awesome horror movies. They got the license for it in 1985 and talked to him about the movie. And he wanted to make the movie a horror movie with a human spider hybrid. And they also approached Tom Cruise to play Peter Parker.
Okay. I'm just seeing this play out in my head right now. I don't think this would have worked. I don't think it would have been good.
It would have been, very... who's the Canadian director with all the body horror stuff? Cronenberg. It feels like it would be... Yeah, I feel like that would be a David Cronenberg horror movie of sorts.
Yeah.
Also, I do think Tom Cruise would have been a great Peter Parker at that young of an age. I mean, he was fantastic in The Outsiders.
I could see that, yeah.
They eventually end up losing the rights because they just didn't end up making a film with it. So in the 1980s, Orion Pictures gets the rights to Spider-Man, and they approach Roger Corman, who is, again, another one of these B-movie gods. And he approached Stan Lee, and the two came up with a screenplay that was very faithful to the comics, actually.
Interesting.
But it ended up going two different ways because Stan Lee wanted to be a very expensive budget spectacle. Whereas Roger Corman wanted to be very low-key, and he wanted to make it with local talent. He liked using local actors and people that he knew in these kind of bigger films that he would give these smaller roles to. And it ended up taking so long that the rights just ended up expiring. In the 90s, we have James Cameron's Spider-Man.
Oh boy. James Cameron was involved with Spider-Man? Gordon, you're blowing my mind.
Get this. He wrote a 90-page treatment for Spider-Man that the film would have been rated R, apparently. They had scenes of Spider-Man using his powers to peep on Mary Jane. You could probably guess who he had in mind for Peter Parker. He wanted Leonardo DiCaprio to either play Peter Parker or Harry Osborn, and Drew Barrymore for Gwen Stacy. And they also had Sarah Jessica Parker and Molly Ringwald in the running for Mary Jane.
Molly Ringwald? Really? That's insane. Who would you prefer to see Leo play? Harry Osborn or Peter Parker?
That's a great question. I think I'd love to see Leo, because I do think Leonardo DiCaprio hasn't played enough villains. He's proven that he could be a phenomenal villain in, I'm sure, other movies, but obviously Django Unchained.
Well, gentlemen, you have my curiosity, but now you have my attention.
To see him have that ability to maybe even over the course of a trilogy transform from a friend into an enemy by the end, I think it'd be a fantastic transformation to have. But then again, having Leonardo DiCaprio be Peter Parker is like, he already won America's heart once as a heartthrob. I don't think it'd be fair to give him another movie to have everyone fall in love with him again. People need to hate Leonardo DiCaprio a little bit. We gotta, he's so universally loved that even when he plays a villain, we're like, he does it too well. I still love him,
We gotta knock him down a couple steps. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So the villains planned for the James Cameron film were going to be Electro and Sandman. And I think these are great villains because if you've seen James Cameron's The Abyss, he's able to take new technology and incorporate it in a way where it's not overutilized or overstretching its boundaries by any means. The monster in The Abyss was very basic, but you could imagine how he could replicate that style with maybe a Sandman being a particle generated monster, or the Electro being this like grandiose electric thing that can zip around. And I just love in 80s and 90s movies when anything was ever electric, they would just draw on the film cells and you would get these super cool, it's like how they drew like the lightsabers hand by hand. It's like anytime you see that in the movies, now it's all just on a computer. And I think that this movie would have just been massive. They wanted to get Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Doc Ock.
Oh my God.
Awesome. How great would that have been?
Unreal.
I can't believe we never got this.
Let's petition. Let's make this happen right now.
Yeah, honestly, well, he wrote a 90-page treatment for it, which I do want to find and read one day, because I do think, it would be fascinating just to see what sort of story he wanted to tell in this first movie. And what ended up happening, this is pretty complicated, but the film was in legal heck because James Cameron signed his contract for Spider-Man using his previous Terminator 2 contract as a template. And this gave him the rights to decide on the movie and advertising credits. So he was basically in charge of what you worked on the movie. He would be able to determine what your credit would be on that.
Right.
And the company who gave him the contract, called Carolco, tried to sue him. Carolco sued him, and then he sued back. And in 1996, Marvel, 21st Century, and Carolco all went bankrupt, and the film just ended up being lost.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah, so this movie was being worked on, and because of a legal dispute, it wasn't made.
Yeah, I kind of get the impression that Spider-Man has sort of been a tortured movie character over the course of history.
Did someone say tortured movie character? We must be talking about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 film that was canceled.
No.
The executives behind the third film ended up messing with Raimi's cut. They wanted to put in a bunch of villains that he wasn't ready to put in, and it ended up underperforming. And for the fourth film, he really wanted to get the Vulture played by John Malkovich.
Are you a simpleton?
That,
Wow.
I can't stop thinking about that. And he wanted Mysterio played by Bruce Campbell.
This is my boomstick!
These are the things that keep me up at night, Gorian. Since we've talked about all three different Spider-Man, I guess, universes, I'm going to ask you this.
Yeah.
Who is your
Go for it.
favorite Spider-Man actor? Is it Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or Tom Holland?
Ooh, or Tom Cruise. That's a tough one. I think it's just one of those things where, much like video games and like children's movies and such, I think it's whichever one was closest around to when you were at the most suspectable age. I mean, Spider-Man was a phenomena when we were in the early 2000s. Like, it was mind-blowing to see these movies coming out. And I remember seeing the third one on opening night and leaving the theater at midnight and being absolutely ecstatic about it. I didn't know it was a bad movie. I had a lot of fun with it because it's a children's movie at the end of the day. You can't really put all this downer stuff in it. I mean, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had like a sequence where like Peter Parker watches his dad die on an airplane while recording a message on a laptop or something.
Yeah.
There's no pizza time in those movies.
Pizza time.
They ended up eventually cancel Raimi's movies and, relaunch as The Amazing Spider-Man. So I'm just going to rapid fire through the remaining directors that were, brought on board in one way or another to try and make a Spider-Man film.
Love it.
Studios were looking at Michael Bay, obviously.
What?
A Michael Bay Spider-Man movie?
You've already
Sign
lost
me
me,
up.
Gorian.
Put me down for that. We have Chris Columbus, who directed Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire, and is also directing the Five Nights at Freddy's movies.
What?
I think that would have been fun. I think he would have had a Spider-Man that was a bit more for children. I mean, that's the thing with Home Alone and Mrs. Doubtfire. We love watching those movies, despite them being very obviously goofy kids movies, but he nails that balance between fun for adults and fun for kids, which I think would have been great for Spider-Man.
Exactly. I totally agree. But he also directed the first couple of Harry Potter movies, didn't he?
Exactly. And
Right.
could you imagine the franchise history? Could you imagine having 7 or 8 Spider-Man movies like they did with those Harry Potter movies? I'm getting giddy just thinking about it.
Oh my God. I want to live in an alternate universe. That's what I need, man.
So we have Barry Sonnenfeld, who did Men in Black and Wild Wild West, another fun 90s director. And then we have David Fincher, who everyone remembers from the Coca-Cola Blade Roller commercial. In 1999, he directed a Coca-Cola Blade Runner parody, which is what everyone knows David Fincher for. That's his most famous work, I'm pretty sure. They approached Fincher twice, and he basically told them ideas, and they hated them. Fincher's original idea was for the first 10 minutes of the movie to be a montage of Spider-Man's origin, the death of his uncle, losing Mary Jane, and then after that, Gwen Stacy would be killed by Green Goblin very shortly. And he wanted to focus on the idea of a teenager with this notion of moment in time where you're so vulnerable, yet completely invulnerable. You're a child with superpowers. That's fantastic. And obviously, David Fincher wanted Edward Norton as Peter. Now, 1999, Edward Norton was fairly young, and Tobey Maguire was older than Edward Norton when he would have made this movie. So, who knows what that would have looked like? Let's talk about what do you think would be the most impactful Spider-Man movie? Would you think that if the third Amazing Spider-Man film came out, they would have caught up to Marvel? Or maybe if they made one of these, what if Sam Raimi made Spider-Man 4 and we just never got the multiverse of Marvel films? What if that just continued on?
Oh, see, these are all interesting things to think about. But again, if The Amazing Spider-Man 3 happened, Like, I don't think it would. I just don't think it would have been good because based on the second one, it wasn't great. And then if Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 4 had happened, which, I mean, I know some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on, and there's no way it would have, but I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
We're going to move on now from Spider-Man movies to just other franchise films that have had sequels greenlit that were canceled later on. So a quick example of what I think is an interesting one is Batman and Robin 3. Now, in the second Batman and Robin film, universally known for being extra goofy, very fun movie, but not very Batman. And they greenlit the third film while the production of the second film, and they were going to call it Batman Unchained. They were going to have Scarecrow be the primary villain, and he was going to actually use fear toxin to resurrect the Joker through hallucinations.
Interesting.
I think that's a great idea to try and bring back in Jack Nicholson as the Joker, but you wouldn't want to bring Jack Nicholson into those goofy Schumacher films. And they were going to have Harley Quinn be the Joker's daughter. And after the second film flopped, George Clooney declined to return, and we never ended up getting another Batman film until the beginning of the Nolan franchise.
George Clooney's a smart man.
George Clooney is a genius, except for when he did Tomorrowland.
Yes.
And it's tough to imagine if Christopher Nolan never made that Batman franchise. I mean, those Batman films, despite Christopher Nolan being a phenomenal director, though that Dark Knight film was really what put him on the map for both cinephiles and just moviegoers in general. Everyone saw The Dark Knight countless times. And to think that if we got this goofy third Batman and Robin film, we may have never gotten, you know, the beginning of the, what do they call it? The Grimverse, the Darkverse, these kind of edgier superhero films that sometimes take it too far, but when they're in line like The Dark Knight are fantastic.
Yeah.
Before this, you were telling me about a Superman movie.
I was. Gorian, I think you may know about this already, but at one point in time, there was supposed to be a Superman movie starring, you guessed it, Nicolas Cage. Can't even imagine what that would have been like. But
and that was supposed to be directed by Tim Burton, right?
It was supposed to be directed by Tim Burton. In addition, there was actually a pretty cool cast as well. It also starred Christopher Walken as Brainiac, Sandra Bullock or Courtney Cox as Lois Lane, Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor, and Chris Rock as Jimmy Olsen.
Can you tell me about the villain in the movie?
Brainiac?
Yeah, so there was supposed to be another villain along with Brainiac, which was this massive electronic kind of steampunk spider.
1, I don't want to see him in that suit. 2, I don't want to see him fly. And 3, he's got to fight a giant spider in the third act.
Everyone knows the story. I think it was like the year after Wild Wild West came out. So you can see that they kind of altered the script because I guess whoever invented that spider really wanted to be in a movie for some reason.
If you ask me, it should have been in Spider-Man.
Now we're going to get to a bunch of lesser known sequels, but films that still had sequels for one reason or another turned down. And we'll go over some of these quickly. We have Forrest Gump, and there's supposed to be a sequel to it called Gump and Company. And it was going to follow Gump doing Gump things like meeting Princess Diana. He was supposed to meet Tom Hanks at the premiere of Forrest Gump.
I did hear about this. That would have been fantastic. I don't know.
There's a great bit in this film, The Family, where Robert De Niro is in a theater watching Goodfellas, and you're kind of just like scratching your head being like, is the world going to implode on itself right now? Like, it's a very tongue-in-cheek joke.
So good.
He was supposed to end up in the back of OJ's Bronco and was supposed to capture Saddam Hussein. But basically, they ended up taking too long to make the film, and Zemeckis felt that the film wasn't really relevant anymore, and it wasn't really appropriate for the time that it would be coming out in. It was very much a 90s kind of whimsical thing.
Right. Interesting. That would have been a sight to see, for sure.
We have E.T. 2, Nocturnal Fears.
What?
I mean, you can imagine the high, I don't know if it's the highest grossing film, but like, it's freaking E.T. Everyone watched that movie, so obviously you would think that they would have had a bunch of sequels planned for it.
Yeah, now that I think back on it, I'm kind of surprised there weren't.
Nowadays, it seems like the things that studios do is they just churn out, you know, sequels to literally anything they do. They have, you know, The Secret Life of Pets 5, you know?
Yeah.
Versus back then, we wanted a Goonies 2, you know? We wanted an E.T. 2.
Yeah.
We wanted all these great sequels that, yeah, a lot of the time were in development. So The sequel would follow Elliot and his friends being kidnapped by an evil ET race. And Steven Spielberg ended up deciding against it because he said that it would do nothing but rob the original of its virginity.
Interesting. And you know what? I think that is a mentality that a lot of filmmakers and a lot of studios need to adapt to today, because they keep churning out sequels. It's insane. And it's crazy to think that the first sequel, like cinematic sequel, actually wasn't that long ago.
What do you mean?
I believe that for a while, Hollywood didn't want to make a sequel to any movie. So let me confirm this. I think the first one was The Godfather 2, officially.
Oh, so you're saying back in the day in like the 70s, 80s. Yeah, I guess because people would say to themselves, I've already seen the first one.
True.
I will put a on-screen thing to see if you were right or not about that fact.
It's probably wrong. Super wrong.
So we have Brad Bird's Tron 3, which I was a big fan of Tron 2. I think it was a great way to reboot and also make a sequel to a much older film.
Gorian, I'm so happy you brought up Tron 2 because I love that movie, and everybody I say that to thinks I'm an idiot.
Did you see it in theaters in 3D?
No, I don't think I saw it in theaters, but I remember when it came out, I got the Blu-ray, and I loved it. It was so much fun. It was so cool. The CGI was awesome. And granted, what's his name? Kevin Flynn, they did the CGI recreation on his face.
Yeah, it was a little rubbery, but when they were doing it at that time...
Yeah. It was still a new technology, and it has gotten a lot better since, but it was still a cool idea.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'll never get over Hollywood is that they refuse to let old people play old people in movies. I know in Prometheus, they put on like 80 pounds of prosthetics to make someone look like a 90-year-old man versus I think one of the cool things about older movies was like they really would use very old people for these like wizards and whatnot. And like it really fed into like you believing it versus like when you see someone with 80 pounds of prosthetics, you go, yeah, that's just an uncomfortable person in a makeup booth for 8 hours, you know? Get their dad to play them or something.
Right.
So we ended up having Tron 3 being canceled because Tomorrowland by Brad Bird underperformed, and that was despite having George Clooney in the leading role. So kind of hard to give someone another movie after they mess up a movie with George Clooney as the main character.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I remember when that came out and it tanked.
Yeah. We have The Yellow Submarine, which was going to be a Robert Zemeckis film, but after Mars Needs Moms flopped, he decided against it. And the animation studio behind the Mars Needs Mom film shut down. And I think Zemeckis he hasn't made a CG film since. I just don't think he wants to go through that, the heartbreak of making a film like this. And, you watch films like Life After Pi and you hear about what happens to a lot of these VFX companies. So I understand him not wanting to make a CG movie because it's most likely going to underperform and hurt the studio.
Yeah. These things can be very costly if they fail.
So we have a canceled BioShock film by Gore Verbinski, and it was canceled because Zack Snyder's Watchmen film underperformed at the box office, which is a shame because that movie is heavily debated whether or not it's a good film. I think it was a well-made film. There's definitely things that could have been changed, but I'm all for people trying to adapt things and giving it their kind of go. And I think a Gore Verbinski R-rated BioShock movie would have been fantastic, but the studio didn't want to give BioShock an R rating, which if you know the plot of the game is pretty hard to do without it.
Exactly.
And the thing about Gore Verbinski is that he's not known to abuse R ratings. He uses the ratings in a way that benefits the film and makes it kind of more mature for a wider audience than making a very gory movie for just people that are into those R-rated movies. And some of the films that he's made are Pirates of the Caribbean, Rango, which are kind of serious or more serious children's movies. I mean, Rango's got a Fear and Loathing reference in the middle of it. Like, that guy is able to extend what he can do with a rating. And he also directed one of my favorite films of all time, The Weatherman, which is a hard film to pitch. It's a Nicolas Cage being a weatherman who gets the weather wrong in a city and people just don't like him.
I heard you! Tartar sauce!
Tartar sauce. Anything else? No?
Without an R rating, that film just wouldn't have been as punchy. It didn't really have anything vulgar or offensive about it, but the freedom to be able to let a certain actor use certain words to convey an emotion really helps sell the film. And it's a BioShock movie. It has to be R-rated. Come on.
Exactly. How do you stay true to the original content if you can't do that? That's so crazy to me.
We have Firestarter, which is a Stephen King novel, and John Carpenter was supposed to direct an adaptation, but after he directed The Thing notoriously came out to very panned reviews, and people, I think even Roger Ebert gave it a bad review. So he was on board to direct Firestarter, and he was on a pay-or-play deal, which meant that they would basically pay him for the movie, whether or not he made it. And the studio didn't want him to make the movie after The Thing, so they undercut him on the budget, and Carpenter ended up just leaving, and they made the film without him in 1984.
Huh. That's sneaky.
Yeah.
That's very sneaky.
And then lastly, we'll just round up with some of these. We have George Romero, who's supposed to make an adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand, which is about a widespread virus that kind of dwindles the population in America and is a fantastic graphic novel series by Marvel. I must have read it in like a week and a half. It is such a good series by Marvel. I really wish they did more Stephen King properties.
Interesting.
This is a very funny one because after a bunch of bad Stephen King films were made around the same time, including Stephen King directing his own Maximum Overdrive movie,
this machine just called me.
They decided not to make any more Stephen King movies at the time and later developed it into an underdeveloped miniseries. But George Romero doing a zombie-esque plague movie, that would have been good.
Yeah, that would have been so good. Man.
And then you tell me about these Halo movies you're telling me before we recorded.
Yes. So the world of Halo. I was so excited for this film when I was a kid, and I was a huge fan of Halo, and the fact that the studios were even talking about bringing, the space epic to Hollywood was unbelievable to me. And I guess for those of you who don't know, Halo is a wildly successful video game franchise from Microsoft Studios, right?
Yeah, I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
But from the beginning, the idea of a Halo movie was sensationalized, and while pitching the film, Microsoft actually sent people dressed as Master Chief to deliver the screenplay to studio executives.
Whoa.
Wouldn't that'd be so crazy? Yeah, no joke. And obviously they were, repped by an agency, and maybe it was the agency's idea. It doesn't matter.
If you had Master Chief give you a screenplay,
yeah,
I'm on board.
Oh, I would melt. I would be so happy. I'd be like, I'm financing this movie with the $3,000 I have in my name. Let's do it. But essentially, Neil Blomkamp, and he's the director of District 9 and what was that other one with the robot?
He did Chappie, and then he also did Elysium.
Yes.
So was this being rumored after he did District 9, I believe, around like 2009, or was it after he did all these movies?
No, this was ages ago. So I think this is actually his first studio foray, because I'm pretty sure this is...
Yeah, District 9.
They were talking about making this movie around 2005. So...
Wow.
I know, very crazy. But Neil Blomkamp was set to direct, and it was supposed to be incredibly expensive. So what ended up happening is that ultimately it wasn't one studio that signed on to this. Fox and Universal decided to band together to finance the film, which is a little unusual in and of itself, right? But as time went on, the studios became unhappy with Blomkamp's direction, and eventually Fox pulled out of the deal, and without their financing, everything else kind of just came to a halt.
Interesting. So,
right.
And did it end up in limbo, or is it still like someone owns the rights to Halo? And because I feel like I hear rumors every other year about Netflix might make a Halo TV show, or someone might pick it up and do this.
So what essentially has happened is that movie in particular, that idea is dead. It's totally in the water.
Dang.
Not going to happen. But since then, Microsoft Studios has come out with other content related to Halo, like animated stuff, TV shows, some movies. But just as a little side thing here, I don't think Neil Blomkamp had a great time working on this movie. It kind of sounds like the execs were not super happy with him. And I quote from Neil Blomkamp, "They treated me like shit."
So a film that's canceled is never made, but a film that's never released might as well have been canceled. Some of these films were eventually released, and some have no release on site. And we're gonna take a look at these films that were shelved for a variety of reasons, from being displeased with the final results to viral marketing gimmicks. A recent example about a film that did come out but didn't for a while was the whole interview fiasco we had a couple of years ago.
You mean James Franco and Seth Rogen?
They had the movie about the leader of North Korea, and it ended up being not brought to theaters. I remember seeing the movie in a theater because I went to a test screening of it.
Oh, no way.
This was way before anything it was like months before anything came out about it. And I remember being genuinely shocked when they pulled the movie because everyone's seen the movie by now. It wasn't that bad. It was a comedy.
Yeah.
When it was pulled from theaters, there were lots of articles of people saying, oh, is it ever going to come out, And I think this is a great example to have at the start because while with films leaking more frequently, it's only a matter of time before studios decide to release these films themselves. There were so many people that were convinced that the film wasn't going to come out, but this ended up acting as like a self-promotion and incentivized people to see it. Right. I mean, people all the time now, The Hunt did it recently, where the fact that you can't get the movie becomes its own promotion for it.
Exactly.
Whenever I see this, all I think of in my head is, it'll come out in a year. These movies that people faint in the theaters at TIFF, they always end up coming out. And it's basically impossible these days to make a modern film that doesn't get released somehow. Mm-hmm. We're going to go back in time now, and we're going to talk about a film called Uncle Tom's Fairy Tales. And this was supposed to be the director of Wayne's World, Penelope Spheeris' directorial debut.
Okay.
Penelope, hilarious with Wayne's World, and she was making a film while she was a student with a young Richard Pryor. Richard Pryor's wife shredded the film because he was spending too much time working on it.
No way.
Yeah, so some of the footage eventually was screened at a 2005 Richard Pryor tribute by Penelope, but then that just instigated a lawsuit about who owned the rights to the movie, and it just became a legal mess. So some of these examples, you do see that some of the film is lost, and they're able to recover maybe a script or some of the film, but it's not the whole film,
Yeah.
So can you really call that canceled?
Exactly. But if that happened to me, I would be so heartbroken. You spend all this time working on something and bam, it's shredded.
We have one of the most famous examples, The Day the Clown Cried. And this is without a doubt, the most notorious film that was never released. Jerry Lewis wrote a dark comedy about a clown during World War II, and the plot of it is just heinous. You can't mix concentration camps with a clown. And he shot and completed the entire film before realizing it was an awful idea.
Oh my God. Are you serious?
Yeah, so he locked the film away for years.
Yeah.
I've definitely made short films where I go, no one's going to watch. I'm locking this up in my own vault along with Jerry Lewis.
Right click, delete, empty trash.
And some people were able to see this movie over the years. Harry Shearer, who worked on The Simpsons, saw it and said it was perfectly abject, whatever that means. Okay. And over the years, he's been asked to screen it at Cannes. And in 2015, he actually donated the movie to the Library of Congress under the stipulation that it's not publicly screened until 2025. We have Todd Phillips and his film Frat House. And in 1998, Todd Phillips directed an HBO documentary about what happens with the brothers at Alpha Tau Omega fraternity. And, Todd Phillips has always been known as being the frat guy. He made The Hangover. He made Old School. The guy loved frats. And this film played at Sundance the same year it was shot, and it won awards. But it was panned because apparently a lot of the material in the film was staged and misrepresented the actual frat.
Huh.
So this is one of those movies where, it was completed, it was shown, and I'm sure that there's copies of it floating around, but it was never released officially. And it is much like Nanook of the North, if you've ever seen it. Just misrepresenting something in a documentary is a super fast way to make sure that no one's ever going to want to watch that movie.
Right.
We have a film called 100 Years, which technically isn't canceled. I'll give him that. But I guarantee you we might not be able to see this movie. It's a Robert Rodriguez directed film starring John Malkovich, and it's a promotion for Remy Martin, a cognac company. And they wanted to have a film that would coincide with their 100-year-old cognac release in 100 years. So they shot a film and locked it with the cognac to be released.
No, I've heard about this, and I think it's actually a pretty cool idea. As you were describing it, I thought this was going to be more of a Boyhood kind of thing where they shoot a scene of it every year for 100 years, which is like, man.
That would be awesome.
Robert Rodriguez life expectancy. God, life expectancy must be through the roof. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is great is that these whole time capsule things, I think it'd be fantastic for people to start doing this maybe every 10 or 15 years. Like, it doesn't have to be a great expensive film. Like even being able to age a film for 10 years and say, hey, we're going to film this, but kind of hold off on it just for like a couple months or a couple yeds builds the anticipation. I mean, if you told me that like Sam Raimi was saving his Spider-Man 4 movie for 2030, hyped, dude. That'd be the event of the year.
Exactly.
We have Don's Plum, which is kind of famous currently. So Don's Plum is a Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire film that's a black and white, mostly improvised film.
Okay.
They painted themselves pretty negatively in the movie. It was a lot of improv, and they were super young, so it was kind of just like, you know, dumb young adolescent stuff that they were saying.
Do you girls masturbate at all?
Oh, that is so gross.
You know, trying to get to know you a little bit.
Right.
And they decided that it could hurt their reputation as young stars. So they filed a lawsuit that prevented the film from coming out in the US and Canada. And they originally agreed to make the film as a favor to a friend, but they said that they were deceived. In 2014, Dale Wheatley, one of the writers, published an open letter to DiCaprio on a website that's called freedonsplum.com. And he gives his takes on the events of the film and like the legal problems that he's been battling over the years. And he ended up uploading the film for free online. And it was taken down after Leo and Toby claimed infringement. So while it was technically not released, it has been leaked online by one of the writers. And the writer had this to say. He said, "It saddens me deeply that in 2016, we witnessed the senseless oppression of film and art by one of America's most beloved actors. While the world celebrates his great achievements in cinema, he chooses to use an iron fist to suppress the work of many other artists, including him in a film made 20 years ago."
Ouch. Oh, that is a burn.
And that's interesting because that really is what film is all about. Film's about trying and experimenting with new things. And people do get mad about content that you put in movies, but I think that the majority of people understand that these are actors. Like, they're not really meaning what they say in a lot of these movies. Like, if you ever seen like a bad improv show, I guarantee you those improv comics would not want anyone else to see their material. But again, like the Richard Pryor film, a lot of people probably worked on this and like wanted to use it on their resumes and show people that they worked on a film with Leonardo and Toby, even if it wasn't a great film. Could you imagine if we tried to sweep away films that were not the greatest? We'd be missing out on a lot of what makes us love a lot of these actors from these movies. I mean, could you imagine if every bad Nicolas Cage movie was swept away? We wouldn't have some of like the best movies ever made.
I haven't had a Spanish omelet in a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of like comedy in a way, where it's like, again, it's comedians making jokes. They don't like mean what they say necessarily. It's a joke, right? But I don't know. People take it seriously. Yeah. And sometimes you lose some of the good stuff.
It ended up being uploaded, and you can watch the film online now. And honestly, it's fairly tame. And more than anything, it's just a very interesting look at these young actors, you know? And especially because Toby is in it with Leo, you can kind of see a little Spider-Man, you know? You can kind of see a little Spider-Man in him, and how they must have wanted the both of them at some point or another.
Yeah.
Pizza time.
So we'll land on the last film that was filmed but not released, and it's called My Best Friend's Birthday. Now, this is a Quentin Tarantino movie, and he wrote a short script about a man trying to do something nice for his friend's birthday, only for that to blow up in his face. And Tarantino and his co-writer ended up producing the film for about $5,000 and made it into a bit of a feature. The original cut of the film was 70 minutes, but because of a fire in a processing lab, half of the footage was destroyed. And they ended up cutting it into a 36-minute short film that's been screened at festivals, and you can find this copy online. It's very rough copy, but...
Wait a minute, Gorian. I'm actually more surprised at the fact right now that they made a feature-length film for $5,000.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, we will... The film alone that they used, you know, and this was a very early Tarantino film. I'm not exactly sure if it was around the same time that he was doing Reservoir Dogs, but even in Reservoir Dogs, the people in that film had to wear their own suits to set. They didn't have a budget and asked everyone to wear their nice clothes to set.
Exactly.
So you can see how Tarantino can stretch a budget.
Yeah.
And you instantly think of the scene from Inglourious Bastards where all the film catches on fire and lights up the entire theater. And I kind of feel like that's Tarantino kind of giving a wink and a F you to the original fire that lost all of his work in. I mean, it's devastating, you know? I mean, even on Tiger King, when they lost all that footage in that fire,
Yeah.
I felt bad for the guy, you know? Maybe that was a canceled TV show we can talk about one day.
Hey, honestly.
I think James Cameron's Spider-Man would have been the blockbuster. I think it would have potentially surpassed Lord of the Rings if it came out around the same time. I mean, those Spider-Man films came out pretty close, and you can probably tell that right after the Titanic, they were running to James Cameron asking him to make a big budget Spider-Man film. And I think this Spider-Man film would have been a bit more in line with Raimi's Spider-Man film, where you have Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Doc Ock, so it's still a bit cartoony, but you could tell that, you know, Terminator 2, like James Cameron understands how to take a child on a journey that is a bit bigger than what he's ready for.
Right, I agree. I see exactly what you mean. And to be honest, I'm still thinking about all this Spider-Man stuff because, again, if this didn't happen, then who knows if we would have Marvel Spider-Man right now in Avengers. But I kind of want to say E.T. 2. I think that
I was thinking the same thing.
Man, if E.T. 2 happened, first of all, that would have been interesting, but would we have another classic classic movie to add to our list of childhood favorites? Like, or would it be terrible and would it have ruined the original E.T.? I don't know.
Because he must have, you know, Steven Spielberg now doesn't have any problems making sequels, but he really was the king of these standalone movies that really didn't deserve sequels, but I'm sure, like, people wanted to, like, coax him into sequels. Like, I think films like The Terminal are fantastic, and you can always tell that, like, these executives must have come up to him with, like, ludicrous suggestions for potential sequels to these movies. And God, like, imagine they turn E.T. into like a TV show or something, you know?
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on right now too with Todd Phillips and Joker 2. The studio wants it to happen. Todd Phillips does not want to make it, you know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah.
Has Todd Phillips said he doesn't want to do a Joker sequel?
Yeah, he's so incredibly opposed. Like, he made the Joker movie.
Really? Good for him.
Yeah, he made the movie without the intention of having a sequel because he just wants it to be its own thing. Like, it doesn't need one.
You wouldn't get it.
It was just its own story, and the studios obviously want to make more money. So,
do you think he learned that lesson because they made 3 of those Hangover movies, and people were kind of saying by the third one and second one it was like kind of the exact same formula, but that first one raked in money, and you could just tell that they were ready to give him a second chance, as long as you just make it like the first movie, you know?
Yeah. I want to say no and like give him the benefit of the doubt, but I think he did learn his lesson because the other 2 Hangover movies, Hangover 2 wasn't as bad as Hangover 3. I think.
Passable, but
they were still not great.
Again, he made Old School, and I guarantee they wanted a sequel to that or something. He's great at making these kind of just on their own movies that kind of last. I mean, I still can't believe he made the Joker. After seeing War Dogs in theaters, I was ready to just throw in the flag. But you know what? Given enough chances and given enough time to experiment and see what works for you, he's gonna sell out whatever next movie he makes, guaranteed. Whatever he wants to come out, it's gonna come out, and it's gonna be rated R. It's gonna be all him, and people are gonna flock to it.
I think so, and I hope so too.
What can we say about canceled movies?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned today, Gorian, is that studios get in the way sometimes.
And we should never really be angry if a movie ends up getting canceled or not, because we really don't know the reasons why, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know, if you love a movie, go support it. I think that's my takeaway.
Tell them online, leave reviews. Like, this stuff does go a long way, and you know, fingers crossed we'll be able to see some of these canceled films brought back to life one day in forms of comic books or like TV shows, or just ways to be able to tell that story the way we wanted it to. We want to know what your Pacific Rim 2 would have been, Del Toro.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can they find you?
Well, hey, you can find me on the internet. I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all those fun places at Nick the Sound Grip. But I'm also on Did Somebody Say Movies podcast. You can check us out online at DSSM_podcast. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. Make sure to subscribe and let us know what canceled movie you'd like to see. For me, it's gotta be Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. Give the man a Marvel movie already.